So as many of you know, voting has started in many states, either vote by mail or in-person early voting. We actually are starting to get some raw numbers in. And in today's video, we're going to look at a few key states in regards to those early numbers. So we're going to be looking at Florida, North Carolina, Virginia, and Wisconsin. So they are going to be the focus of today. And in addition to showing you the early numbers, some are very, very early, like North Carolina, but then some like Virginia, we're already at 10% turnout and we can actually start getting some information as to what's happening. In addition to that analysis, I'm also going to be showing you my voting trend Nowcast model. So I'll talk about the different models when we get to them. One is based on averages over previous elections. The other one's based on voter turnout based on party identification. So we're going to go into those, explain those, but I wanted to start talking about those models now, even though it's extremely early, to go ahead and track and see how they go over time so you can see how the numbers are actually shifting. So let's go ahead and start looking at the state of Florida, because in the state of Florida, as I mentioned in one of my previous videos, there have been some shenanigans when it comes to the vote by mail laws. But let's go ahead and look at the requests that have been made for vote by mail in the state of Florida. So the Democrats right now are at 42.2%, the Republicans are at 35.5%, and those numbers will probably help the Democrats a little bit more over the coming days. The one thing that we do see is we see the NPA, non-party affiliate voters, and others much, much lower. So as I mentioned, there is a law in Florida, and we're starting to see the Republicans go up a little bit more, the Democrats staying about the same, but the NPA and others are going down compared to 2022. And to me, because a lot of nonpartisan affiliates actually went for DeSantis and went for Marco Rubio in the last election, I think that this actually helps Democrats a little bit more, but that's the request numbers, significantly lower than 2020 and even lower than 2022, a midterm election. So as you can see in the state of Florida, we see the Democrats are slightly ahead when it comes to turnout so far, and we're only at 0.2% turnout. So you can see the Democrats are at 43.7% right now of the ballots that have been cast. Republicans are at 34.3%. And the NPA and others, even though their numbers are lower as far as requests, are at 21.9%. So very early numbers. These numbers will shift, but in mail vote, we should probably see something kind of similar to this, though the numbers will probably get a little bit closer. So to put it in perspective, back in 2022, 36% of Florida voted by mail in that election. And if we take early voting and vote by mail, 65% of the overall electorate did vote early or vote by mail in the overall electorate. So this is a huge number. Now in 2020, 83% of the electorate in the state of Florida either voted early or voted by mail. So this is a state where these numbers will go up significantly. We will see a lot of vote by mail. And then once early voting happens, we'll see that really, really jump. There are votes on election day. We saw way more votes on election day in 2022 compared to 2020, obviously. But Florida has been one of these early voting states for many, many years. As a matter of fact, in the past, Democrats dominated early in-person voting while Republicans actually did better in mail-in votes. That has now switched in the state of Florida. But we'll keep a trend, look at this trend and see what happens. Let's go ahead, go over to the state of North Carolina, which has very, very, very few votes. So if you see the state of North Carolina, we are only at 0.1% turnout, so very, very little. We see that Democrats are 43.4% of the turnout so far. Republicans are only 19%, with non-party affiliates and others at 37%. But it should be noted that in the 2022 election in North Carolina, mail-in votes only accounted for 5% of the overall vote. So even though we do have these mail-in votes right now and the turnout's really low, we shouldn't expect these numbers to get really high because they usually don't in the state of North Carolina. I just want to put these up so you can see a trend right now of what is happening. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and look at some of the Nowcast models. On the first Nowcast model we're going to look at is Florida and then North Carolina, because as you can see with North Carolina, we probably won't get many more numbers, but the Florida numbers will continue to rise, and Florida offers election day turnout as well. So on election day, when the polls close at 7 p.m. East Coast time, I have a good idea of how the state of Florida is going to go, because the panhandle is not going to see much. But basically, these models are based on party registration, with the assumption that if you are registered with a party, you're probably going to vote for that party. But then this also accounts for shifts in different counties where the party registration and the actual results don't always equal. So it basically makes this assumption and then says essentially that those who are registered as non-party affiliates and independent voters, other minor parties, and so on, will split based on what these numbers are. So we're going to look into the Florida number first, then we'll look at the North Carolina number. Both models are based off the same theory of this idea of registration equals vote choice, which if we look at the regression analysis of these, it's a pretty good indicator in Florida and in North Carolina as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Florida model first. And just really quick, before we continue, a lot of people who come to this channel are not subscribed, but I thank you all very much for coming to this channel. Please subscribe to the channel, hit the little subscribe, hit the little bell for notifications so you know when the videos come out. And let's go ahead and go to the next model. Okay, so here's the vote trend nowcast for today, October 22nd. And as you can see, it's only a 0.2% turnout in Kamala Harris. If the election ended right now, only of the people who have already voted, which would be only that 0.2%, Kamala Harris would be up 55.8 to 44.2. So this is only based on the people who have already voted. Now, what's important to know about this model is, yes, it is a nowcast model, so it only projects who has actually voted now. To me, even this early on, those numbers are kind of low for Kamala Harris, because once early voting comes and early voting happens, that's usually going to be more Republican. Now, the big number that we're going to look at in this nowcast model when we get to election day, 56%. If Kamala Harris is up 56 or 57% in this model before election day starts, then the Democrats have a really good chance of winning the state. It would be very close. It would essentially be a 50-50 race, but it would be a very close race nonetheless. So this actually is an important indicator to look at. And the fact that even with the vote by mail, something that should be helping her a lot more, even in these early stages, she's not even at that 56 or 57%, or she's just right at it, I think spells a little bit of trouble for the Democrats. But again, as more votes come in, which we're going to get more this week, let's go ahead and see what happens after that, because I think the numbers will change, but I do worry that they won't get enough to offset what will happen on election day. So let's go ahead and go to the North Carolina one, which basically is not much right now due to the fact that only 5% in 2022 voted by mail. But let's go ahead and look at the model. So you can see the nowcast model based on the same criteria as we had with the Florida model, with 0.1% turnout. Kamala Harris would win 66.4 to 33.6. Again, you really can't take much of this at all. And at the end of the day, when we look at vote by mail, that's only going to be about what? Maybe 5% of the votes. So we really, in North Carolina, are looking for in-person voting, which at that time, the numbers should help us get a little bit more of an idea where the electorate is going. Now we're going to look at two other states that I didn't mention yet as far as voter turnout, and that is Wisconsin and Virginia. Now, in both of these states, they do not register by party. They just have voter registration, and that means that you just go in, you vote, and then that's it. So we can't use the same model that we use for Florida and North Carolina, because those are based on voter registration. All this model is taking the average of the last 4 elections and then figuring out what the average is for those, doing a standard deviation of those average, taking 2 standard deviations from the mean. That will give us our 95% confidence interval, and then we figure out the high and low ends based on the confidence interval. Now, the numbers that you're going to see in these projections are basically the likelihood of winning. So the first models that we saw is what we expect the vote to be. Okay, so in those, we were saying that Kamala Harris would win, what, 55% of the vote if the election ended right now. These are based on probability, how likely the candidate is going to win. So let's go ahead and first look at the Wisconsin model because it has a little bit of a lower turnout. So we look at the Wisconsin model right now, we see that the turnout is 2.8%, so significantly higher than the other two models that we have already seen. With that being the case of where the votes have come in right now and averaging of those out and basically replicating the previous 4 elections and having a 95% confidence interval, as of right now, it's an 80% likelihood that Kamala Harris would win. Now, again, important thing to note here, this is based on a 2.8% turnout if the election ended today. Let's go ahead and look over the next few days to see if this number gets smaller or bigger. We really don't know. So next model we're going to talk about is Virginia, and I think this is really important because I did a video with the first few numbers that came out of Virginia saying that it looked really good for Democrats, but then what happened is Republican counties started doing a little bit better when it came to that vote. But yesterday, a whole slew of numbers came in from a number of counties showing the Democrats now taking more of a commanding lead. As a matter of fact, my Nowcast model for Virginia yesterday said that Kamala Harris only had a 47% chance of winning, which is still close, 47-53 for Donald Trump. But if we look at the numbers right now, we can see that Kamala Harris, with a 9.9% turnout rate, is at a 58% chance of winning to Donald Trump's 42. Now, the good thing about the Virginia model compared to the Wisconsin model is that the Virginia model includes early voting, which they're doing right now, early in-person voting, and vote by mail, whereas the Wisconsin model is only vote by mail. So you'll see as soon as some of these states have a lot of in-person voting, we're going to see those numbers go up significantly. Now, I did do a model for Minnesota, and I started getting some stats for Minnesota, but the last statistics I've seen are from like September 26th. So I haven't been able to get any new numbers. If I do, we're going to go ahead and share that model on here as well. But I'm looking at these numbers now, and you're starting to see a divergence in the vote in Virginia. And I think that's really, really good for Democrats. So Virginia looks much, much safer for Democrats. There was a day or two ago, I was like, ooh, is this maybe something that could possibly, go off the rails for the Democrats a little bit? I don't think so anymore. Let's look at the trends. Let's see if there's a continuing of the divergence of the vote. And if there is, we'll see. And again, this 58% number is not the percentage that she would win. It's saying there's a 58% chance that she will win the state outright. So there's a 58% chance that she'll win the state by 1 vote or more, essentially. All right, and that's it for today's models. I'm going to be doing videos about the models every day or every other day if I think that there are major changes in the models. If they're just some small minor changes, I won't be doing that. If you want to go to my Substack, please go to my Substack, which is votingtrend.substack.com. I'm going to be putting up maps for my paid subscribers on Substack that they'll be able to follow this as well. So thank you all very much for joining me. Have a wonderful day wherever it is you are. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.